Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not just talking about the Nile. We're returning to the night when Egypt held its breath. A night when the river stopped flowing and the gods went silent. For 7 days, not a drop moved. The priests whispered of forgotten hymns. The queen dreamed of drowning suns, and a blind girl's song brought the water back to life. This isn't just history. It's the story of memory, gratitude, and the rhythm that even the gods once followed. Because every silence hides a lesson, and every river remembers. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes. Let the stars guide you and drift with me down the Nile, where even the stillness can speak.
They said the Nile had never been this still. On that night, the air was cold enough to quiet even the insects. The moon, pale as a forgotten pearl, hovered above the water, and the river lay motionless like a mirror made of stone. Fishermen who lived their whole lives by its banks whispered that something was wrong. The water didn't ripple. The wind didn't sing. Even the reeds refused to sway. It was as if time itself had stopped to listen. In the heart of Egypt, silence was never ordinary. The Nile was not just a river, it was a heartbeat, a breath shared by gods and men. Every sunrise, Hapi, the god of the flood, exhaled life into the land, carrying silt and promise from the faraway mountains. Every year, his pulse rose, swelling the fields with abundance. And every night, his spirit slipped beneath the waves, only to return at dawn. But that night, Hapi did not return. The villagers told of a sound they could not describe, a hollow exhale carried by the wind, deep and heavy, like the sigh of a dying god. The elders remembered the inscription carved long ago in the temple of Ombo. When Hapi sleeps, men dream of endings. Those words, once seen as poetry, now felt like prophecy. The river's silence spread through the villages like a slow frost. Farmers left their lamps burning all night, afraid to look outside. Mothers whispered prayers to Isis, asking her to wake the river's soul. Dogs howled toward the silver sky. In the distance, the priests of Thebes gathered by torchlight, robes swaying like shadows, chanting to reawaken the divine breath of the Nile. They said Hapi's slumber was not random, it was a warning. The gods had turned their eyes away, and Egypt was holding its breath. Beneath the surface, unseen currents stirred. Something ancient was waiting. Something older than the pharaohs, older than the pyramids themselves. The moonlight trembled on the still water, and for the first time in memory, The Nile looked like it was afraid.
As the night deepened, the villagers began to see shapes in the water. Not reflections, but movements, slow and uncertain, as if something beneath the Nile was turning in its sleep. The torches flickered, painting the river bank in trembling gold. An old priest named Hapi leaned over the edge of the dock, whispering to the current as though it could hear him. "Hapi," he murmured, "if you have withdrawn your breath, may we at least dream of your return." His voice fell into the stillness, swallowed by the night. Then the water moved just once, a faint ripple, like the first sigh of waking. Some said they saw faces, half human, half divine, shimmer for an instant under the surface, eyes closed, mouths open in silent lament. Others swore the river spoke that night, not in words, but in a rhythm, like a heartbeat echoing from below. The elders said it was the voice of Osiris, the god of resurrection, wandering beneath the water in search of Hapi's light. The myth said that when the river ceased to flow, Osiris rose to remind men of their fragility, that even the eternal Nile could die and be reborn. There were stories that the priests of Abydos once performed rituals to call the river's soul back to life, using clay jars filled with reeds, milk, and honey, offerings to coax the god's breath. That night, as the moon slipped behind a cloud, a sound came from the deep, soft, rhythmic, like someone inhaling beneath stone. The villagers froze. Even the torches seemed afraid to flicker. Hapi turned to the crowd and said softly, "He is dreaming. The Nile dreams of the end and of beginning again." His words spread like a current of calm through the terrified hearts around him. Mothers clutched their children closer. The stars, now hidden, seemed to listen. And beneath the dark mirror of the river, something vast stirred, not with anger, but remembrance. They said the gods do not sleep as men do. When Hapi sleeps, he walks the underworld, whispering to the souls of forgotten kings, tracing the blue veins of eternity. The Nile's stillness was not death, it was memory, the ancient breath of the world returning home. Just before dawn, the eastern horizon began to glow, not with sunlight, but with a strange silvery hue, as if the heavens themselves were uncertain about returning light to a land that had stopped breathing. The villagers gathered by the banks, silent, their eyes fixed on the still surface of the Nile. The old priest Hapi stood once more by the dock, his torch burned down to its final ember. He closed his eyes and listened. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no motion, only the vast, fragile pause between night and morning.
Then it came, a sound low and slow, like the world inhaling for the first time. The river moved. Ripples spread outward in widening rings, catching the first traces of dawn. The villagers gasped and wept. The water shimmered with a soft glow, like liquid moonlight, carrying the scent of earth newly awakened. Some said it was Hapi breathing again. Others whispered it was Osiris returning the pulse of life to his brother. Keti smiled faintly, tears on his wrinkled cheeks. "He has returned," he said. "The breath of Egypt lives again." The people knelt and touched the river, feeling its warmth return beneath their hands. But something in the current was different. The Nile flowed again, yes, but slower, heavier, as though carrying a memory too deep to release. Beneath its surface, strange shapes flickered. Fish that gleamed like gold, shadows that looked like hands reaching upward before vanishing. And on the bank, carved into the damp sand, the villagers found markings they had never seen before. Spirals, eyes, and a line that curved like a sleeping god's mouth. The priests would later claim they were signs from Hapi, etched by unseen fingers to remind men that breath is not eternal, only borrowed. The sun finally rose, washing the river in gold. The reeds swayed again. The birds returned. The world seemed to exhale. But those who had watched that night would never forget the silence, the moment Egypt's heart had stopped, and then, just as gently, begun again. In the temples, the scribes added a single line to the chronicles of the gods. On the night when the Nile fell silent, Egypt learned to listen.
The air inside the temple of Karnak trembled with incense and whispers. The scent of myrrh drifted through the colonnades, wrapping around the carved pillars like invisible smoke. Outside, the night pressed against the sandstone walls, heavy with the memory of the river's silence. But here, within the sacred heart of Egypt, the priests of Amun gathered by the lake that reflected the stars. The water shimmered faintly under the torchlight, rippling not from wind but from breath, as if something beneath it stirred. The oldest among them, High Priest Minkheper, raised his staff. His voice was a low murmur, worn by years and belief. "Brothers," he said, "the Nile sleeps, and the breath of gods falters. The voice of Hapi is gone, but tonight something else speaks." The priests leaned closer, their white robes glowing in the candlelight, faces painted in gold dust and oil. The sacred lake before them, called Isheru, had long been a mirror between worlds, a place where gods whispered to those who dared to listen. The surface rippled again, and with it came a smell, cold, thick, like wet clay pulled from the belly of the earth. Menkeper inhaled, his brow tightening. "Sobek," he whispered, "the crocodile god of the river. He remembers." Then came the sign. On the lake's dark surface, a reflection began to form, the massive silhouette of a crocodile, motionless yet alive, eyes like twin embers glowing through the mist. No creature swam there. The priests saw only the image, hovering like a vision between light and water. Some fell to their knees. Others crossed their chests in silent awe. Menkeper did not move. He stepped forward until his toes touched the edge of the sacred water. "We have angered him," he said softly. "The offerings of the first flood were forgotten. The river remembers every gift withheld." Around him, the priests began to chant, slow, rhythmic, their voices blending with the sound of dripping water from the columns above. The temple itself seemed to breathe. Candles flickered and shadows danced along the reliefs of Amun-Ra, Mut, and Honsu, gods whose eyes seemed to watch the ritual unfold. And then, from the depths of the lake, a whisper rose. Not the voice of a man, nor the growl of a beast, but something ancient and resonant, a sound like water speaking through stone. The words were not clear, yet every priest understood. "When man ceases to praise, the waters will forget the shore." The whisper faded, leaving behind only the echo of dripping water and trembling faith. Menkeper fell to his knees, his tears touched the sacred lake, merging with the surface that now reflected not the stars, but the watchful eyes of Sobek.
The night within Karnak deepened into a dream. The sacred lake grew still once more, its dark mirror holding the reflection of torches that bent like trembling reeds. The priests, shaken by the voice that had risen from the water, moved with the quiet reverence of men walking in a tomb. Menkeper's voice guided them. "We must remember what was lost," he said. "Sobek does not forgive forgetfulness." The younger priests carried clay tablets and scrolls from the temple archives, laying them upon the stone altar. Dust fell like soft rain as the scrolls were unrolled, lines of hieroglyphs breathing again after centuries of silence. Each symbol seemed alive, glowing faintly under the wavering candlelight. "Here," whispered one priest, pointing to a verse written in blue ink faded by time. It spoke of the first offering of flood, a ritual once performed at the dawn of every inundation, when the Nile's rise marked the renewal of life. The offering was simple: honey for sweetness, oil for purity, lotus petals for memory, and a single beating heart of a fish, the symbol of life itself, returned to the river to remind the gods that man remembered his source. But the verse continued: "If man forgets, The crocodile will remember for him. He will rise to devour forgetfulness. The words hung in the air, heavy as smoke. Menkeper nodded slowly, his eyes glinting in the dim light. We have broken the chain. The Nile gives, and we have taken. Now Sobek reminds us that water has teeth. The priests began preparing the ritual, their movements graceful, deliberate, ancient. Bowls of honey and oil were mixed. Lotus petals floated in golden basins. From a nearby shrine, a carved figure of Sobek, half god, half crocodile, was lifted and placed at the lake's edge. Its obsidian eyes glowed with reflected fire. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, though the sky was clear. Some priests looked upward nervously, but Menkeper raised a hand. The gods do not warn, they remember. As the ritual began, soft chants filled the temple, low, rhythmic, echoing through the columns carved with the names of Amun-Ra and Mut. The sound mingled with the faint dripping of water, creating a pulse that matched the heartbeat of the earth itself. Then, as Menkeper lowered a small offering bowl into the lake, the water responded. A ripple, slow, perfect, circular, spread outward, touching the feet of every priest. The candles flickered, bending toward the center of the lake. And then, from the depths, something surfaced. It was not a creature, but a stone tablet, flat, wet, and marked with unfamiliar carvings. Two priests pulled it from the water and laid it on the altar. The carvings shimmered faintly in the torchlight. Not hieroglyphs, but something older. Menkeper traced his fingers across the lines. The tablet spoke with silence, but in the minds of those gathered, its meaning unfolded. When Nan ceases to praise, the waters will forget the shore. The prophecy was real. The whisper from the lake had not been a dream. Around them, the air trembled again. The reflection of the crocodile returned to the surface, larger now, its eyes steady and knowing. The lake no longer looked like water, it looked like breath.
The night was no longer silent, it was listening. The temple of Karnak seemed to breathe with the lake, every column and stone humming softly with something alive and ancient. The priests knelt around the altar, their faces glowing with fear and devotion, as Menkeper lifted his eyes toward the great statue of Amun-Ra towering in the shadows. "We have seen the warning," he said quietly, "but what must we do to be forgiven?" His voice trembled, yet it carried through the vast hall, echoing against the walls carved with the triumphs of forgotten kings. The air was heavy, not just with incense, but with anticipation, as though the temple itself waited for the gods to speak again. Then a sound, distant, deep, like a heartbeat beneath the earth.
The sacred lake rippled once more, and the reflection of the crocodile shifted, its mouth now open, showing teeth carved of moonlight. From the dark water rose a mist, curling around the priest's hands, their faces, their breath. It was cold, but not cruel. The mist shimmered faintly with gold dust, and within it a voice spoke, not aloud, but inside the mind, low and calm, the voice of something vast. It said, "You have forgotten the first law. You have taken from the waters and named them your own, but the river was never yours. The Nile belongs to no man, only to memory." The priests bowed, trembling. Some wept silently. Others whispered prayers they hadn't spoken in years. Menkaper stood still, his tears reflecting the golden flame. "Then tell us, O Sobek, how shall we remember?" he murmured. The mist pulsed, drifting toward the altar where the stone tablet lay. The carvings on its surface began to move, slow, graceful, like waves made of light. The prophecy deepened, forming a new line beneath the ancient one. Menkaper leaned closer, reading the words that now glowed like liquid fire. "When praise is born again from silence, the waters will find their shore. When hearts remember what hands forgot, Egypt shall breathe once more." The moment hung in sacred stillness. Outside, the wind rose suddenly, sweeping through the open courtyard, scattering petals from the offerings. The stars above seemed to tremble, and then from far beyond the temple walls came a distant roar, not thunder, not beast, but the echo of the Nile itself awakening. The priests gasped. The sound grew, like water rushing through 1,000 unseen veins. The lake rippled brighter, and the reflection of the crocodile slowly dissolved into light. The mist thinned, rising higher until it vanished through the open roof into the sky. Menkaper fell to his knees, his voice breaking in awe. "The god has spoken!" But there was something else, a final sign. Where the stone tablet had lain, droplets of water formed the shape of an eye, perfectly round, looking upward, the eye of Sobek. It shimmered once, then slowly faded, leaving behind the scent of lotus and the stillness of understanding. The priests rose, silent. They did not speak again that night. The prophecy was carved into their hearts, and as the first light of dawn touched the temple's walls, the sacred lake began to shimmer, not with reflection, but with movement. Somewhere far away, the Nile flowed stronger. Egypt, once again, had remembered.
The night before had been ordinary. Soft winds, crickets, and the quiet breathing of the fields. But when the first light came, the farmer Hapi woke to a world on fire. The horizon was no longer gold or rose, it was red. Deep, pulsing red, like the inside of a wound. The light spilled across the soil, over the reeds, over the river's edge, and everything it touched turned the color of blood.
Hapi stood barefoot in the dew, staring at the sky that seemed to bleed into the Nile. The air smelled of iron. The birds were silent. Even the oxen refused to move. And then, through the stillness, he heard it, a whisper carried by the wind that moved without direction. Osiris bleeds. The words were not loud, but they sank into his bones. He turned toward the river and saw it. The water was no longer blue. It shimmered red, as though the blood of the god himself had spilled into its veins. For a moment, the reflection of the sky and the river merged, and it was impossible to tell which one was bleeding. Hapi fell to his knees, heart hammering. He remembered the old stories his grandmother had told, of Osiris, the god of life and resurrection, betrayed and slain by his brother Seth, the god of chaos. How his body had been scattered across Egypt, his blood feeding the earth, and his spirit binding itself to the Nile so that man would never thirst again. And yet, this dawn looked like the moment of that betrayal, reborn in color and silence. As the light brightened, Hapi saw something impossible, the faint outline of a figure standing in the red mist over the water, tall, wrapped in linen, crowned with reeds and lotus. The air around it shimmered, and the reflection in the river wavered like breath. He could not see its face, but the presence filled the morning with weight, with sorrow. The whisper came again, gentler this time. The river remembers. Hapi wanted to run, but his legs would not move. The sound was not frightening, it was mourning. He understood without words that this was no punishment. It was a memory, the Nile recalling its wound, and like a scar reopening, it bled once more, reminding men that divinity too could suffer. The red water lapped against his feet, warm as life, yet cold beneath. He bowed his head. "If Osiris bleeds again," he whispered, "then we have forgotten why he died." A distant rumble rolled through the valley, not thunder, but the echo of something vast stirring beneath the river's bed. The sun rose higher, but its warmth never came. The light blazed, fierce and bright, yet the morning stayed cold. Hapi turned toward his hut, but the field seemed different. The wheat bowed as if in prayer, and even the scarecrow looked like it was watching. That day, no one in the village spoke of harvest. They stood by the banks, watching the red current flow past, each heart heavy with an unspoken fear. And when the night returned, they swore they still saw the crimson reflection shimmering in their dreams.
By midday, the story had already spread beyond the fields. Messengers from neighboring villages came running along the riverbanks, their sandals stained red from the soil. "The Nile bleeds," they whispered. "The god bleeds again." No one had ever seen the river so crimson. Mothers carried jars of water to their doorsteps, only to spill them in fear. The water shimmered like liquid ruby, beautiful yet wrong. Hapi stood among them, still barefoot, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The red sky had faded into gold, but the river refused to change. It carried its color as if bearing a message. That afternoon, a group of priests from Thebes arrived, their robes white, their faces marked with blue ink, the symbol of Osiris painted on their foreheads. They moved with the stillness of those who already knew the truth. The oldest among them, a priestess named Nebet, knelt by the river and dipped her hand into the current. When she raised it, crimson droplets rolled down her palm. "So it is true," she murmured. "Seth has risen again." Her words fell like stones into silence. The villagers gathered, whispering prayers they barely remembered. Nebet turned to them and spoke softly, but her voice carried over the wind. "Do not fear. When Osiris bleeds, he does not die. He reminds." She looked at Hapi, the farmer whose eyes still held the reflection of the burning dawn. "Tell me what you saw." Hapi hesitated, his lips trembling. "The sky burned, and the water, it looked alive. I heard a voice. It said, 'Osiris bleeds.'" The priestess closed her eyes. "Then the prophecy of the river is fulfilled once more. The gods have sent us a memory of pain." She rose and motioned to her acolytes. They began setting up small altars by the bank, bowls of lotus petals, incense, and bread. The scent of frankincense drifted into the air, mingling with the metallic tang of the red water. Nebet lifted her hands. Long ago, when Seth murdered Osiris, the Nile turned red with his blood. It flowed for 7 nights, carrying sorrow from Abydos to the delta. But Isis, his wife, wept by the shore, and her tears cooled the waters. The red faded to blue again, and life returned. That is why we offer both honey and salt, for sweetness and grief must live together. The villagers listened, tears glistening in their eyes. The river seemed to move slower, almost listening. If we forget the sorrow, we forget the gift. And if we forget the gift, the Nile will take it back. As the sun began to sink, she poured a bowl of milk into the current. It spread across the surface, swirling white against the crimson, a sign of peace. "This," she whispered, "is for Osiris, who bleeds so that Egypt may breathe." The crowd bowed. The chants rose, low and rhythmic, echoing against the cliffs. The priests sang the ancient verses of renewal, their voices trembling like distant thunder. Hapi closed his eyes. He could almost feel the river's pulse returning, steady, forgiving. When he opened them again, the red was softer, not gone, but gentler, as though the Nile had accepted their prayers. That night, the villagers built small lamps from clay and floated them on the river. From afar, the lights looked like stars fallen to earth, drifting slowly toward the horizon, the souls of men guiding Osiris home.
By the time night returned, the red had dimmed to bronze. The river flowed slow and heavy, carrying its secret beneath the stars. The lamps the villagers had set afloat drifted quietly, their flames trembling like memories that refused to die. Hapi sat by the bank, his hands buried in the cool soil, feeling the heartbeat of the earth beneath his palms. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and lotus, and the moon hung low, round and heavy, as if watching the water with grief. The priests had withdrawn into silence. Even Nebet, the old priestess, sat motionless, her eyes closed, lips moving in prayer without sound. Only the river spoke, a soft murmur, the sound of breath returning after a long cry. In the distance, frogs began to sing again, and the night regained its rhythm. Yet everyone felt that something had changed, as if the world had taken a deep breath and forgotten to exhale. Hapu stared at his reflection, but the face that looked back was not his own. It shimmered faintly, shifting. A man crowned with reeds, skin glimmering like wet stone. His eyes, green and sorrowful, seemed to see through time itself. Hapu froze. The reflection moved closer, and a whisper rose from the current. "As long as you remember me, the river will live." The words sank deep into his chest, gentle and heavy at once. The reflection faded, replaced by the soft ripple of moonlight. He bowed his head. "I remember," he whispered. Around him, the villagers began to dream, one by one, as though the night had called them inward. They saw the same vision, a great figure standing in the river, its blood turning to light, its voice spreading like wind across the sand. In the dream, Osiris spoke. "Do not fear the color of sorrow, for it is the proof that life remembers." The words echoed through every sleeping heart. The Nile flowed quietly, and its color faded into silver, then into blue. By dawn, the water was clear again, but the people did not celebrate. They woke softly, as if from a prayer rather than from a sleep. The fields seemed to breathe again, the reeds swayed gently, and the birds returned. Yet every villager, from the youngest child to the oldest mother, carried the same feeling that they had touched something eternal and fragile all at once. When Nebet rose from her place by the river, she looked toward the east where the first light was forming. "He has forgiven, but he has not forgotten." The people nodded, wordless. Hapu turned to the river once more. The current sparkled in the growing light, calm and alive, whispering softly against the shore. And though the red was gone, every shimmer of gold upon the water looked for a heartbeat like a memory of divine blood, not as warning, but as a reminder. From that day, whenever the Nile rose in flood, the villagers would toss petals of lotus and drops of honey into its current, murmuring, "For Osiris, who bled so that we may live." And the river, faithful as breath, answered every year with the same gift: water, life, and the quiet promise of memory. In the great temple of Thebes,
Silence had become a ritual of its own. The sound of sandals against the stone floor echoed like memories of forgotten prayers. Candles flickered before statues darkened by centuries of incense, and the air hung heavy with myrrh and dust. It was said that once the priests would sing the hymn of still waters every morning, a song so soft that even the wind would stop to listen. The hymn spoke of a promise made by the three divine keepers of life: Hapi, god of the river; Isis, mother of rebirth; and Osiris, the eternal spirit of renewal. Together they had vowed, as long as the hearts of men remember gratitude, the waters shall never cease. But men had forgotten. The priests now recited the words not as praise, but as memory. Their voices were weary, their chants hollow. In the sacred chamber, a young priest named Tianan stood before the altar, tracing the faded carvings with trembling fingers. He could feel the cool grooves of the hieroglyphs, ripples of a language once alive. He whispered the opening line: "When silence was young, the waters spoke." His voice echoed faintly against the walls, then vanished. The flame before him quivered, as if uncertain. He closed his eyes. "We have sung your names," he murmured, "but the river does not answer." That night, when the temple slept, Tianan dreamed. He found himself standing in a place without horizon. A desert stretched endlessly, the sand pale as bone beneath a sky that held no sun. Yet it was not empty. A mist drifted across the dunes, and through it moved a shape. A boat made not of wood or gold, but of mist itself. It glided soundlessly over the sand, as though sailing upon memory. 3 figures sat within it. The first, veiled in blue, was Isis, her eyes deep as the night sea. The second, radiant yet sorrowful, was Osiris, his hands stained with light. The third, vast and solemn, was Hapi, his skin the color of silt, his hair flowing like reeds in an unseen wind. None spoke. Their faces were calm, but their silence pressed against Tianan's heart like a tide. When he tried to speak, his voice was stolen by the air. The boat drifted closer. The gods looked not at him, but beyond him, as though searching for something lost. Then, in a voice softer than breath, Isis spoke. "Man remembers the river's gift, but not its silence." Her words rippled through the desert, and where they passed, the sand turned to water for a moment, shimmering before drying again. Osiris raised his hand. "They thank when they receive, but gratitude that sleeps is not gratitude at all." Hapi's voice followed, deep, distant, like thunder behind stone. "So let the waters rest until men learn to sing without asking." The mist thickened. The boat began to drift away, fading into the endless horizon. Tianan reached out his hand, but his fingers met only air. Then, in the distance, he saw the Nile, not flowing, but suspended in the air, gleaming like glass. The god's boat glided upon it, vanishing into the stillness. He awoke,
with tears on his face, the echo of the hymn still trembling in his throat. The temple was silent, and somewhere beyond its walls, the sound of water ceased.
When dawn returned, the temple was colder than it had ever been. The air that once carried the scent of incense now felt hollow, as if even the smoke had forgotten how to rise. Chain awoke on the stone floor beside the altar, his dream still lingering like a bruise on the edge of consciousness. The hymn of still waters echoed faintly in his mind, not sung, but remembered. He rose, his knees aching, and stepped toward the open courtyard. The first light of morning touched the statues of Isis and Osiris, but their faces seemed different, not alive, but distant, as though carved by time itself rather than human hands. A bowl of water stood before the statue of Hapi. Its surface was dry. The priests gathered slowly, their robes whispering across the stone. They looked at Chiane, waiting for him to speak, for he alone had seen the dream. "The gods have departed," he said quietly. The words felt heavy, final. They have gone to the desert to sail upon silence. None replied. For the first time, the temple heard nothing. No chant, no prayer, no wind. It was as if the world had forgotten how to breathe. Over the next days, the signs spread. Wells dried before dawn. The river receded, leaving behind cracked veins of earth that glittered like salt in the sun. The fields turned pale, their crops bowing like mourners. The people of Thebes whispered that Hapi's laughter, the song of the flood, had ended. But some refused to believe. They filled jars with sand, carried them into the temple, and poured them before the altar, begging the god to remember the shape of water. It did not rain. The silence grew louder, thicker. Even the birds began to fly elsewhere, south, following what little current remained. The priests recited the old verses every morning, though their voices trembled like dying fire. One evening, Nebet, the elder priestess, stood beside Chiane. "You dreamed of the gods," she said. "Did they speak of this?" Chiane shook his head. "They spoke of silence." "Then this," she whispered, "is the silence made flesh." She looked toward the horizon where the desert began. The air shimmered with heat, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw a glimmer, as though something vast and white was gliding far across the sands. "Do you see it?" she asked. Chiane nodded slowly. "The boat," he murmured, "the boat of mist." They stood side by side, watching as the vision faded. The priests behind them continued their chants, though the words now sounded like echoes trapped between stone and sky. That night, the temple lamps burned low. The wind came once, carrying a faint whisper through the corridors, not cruel, but tender. "We are still watching." It was gone as soon as it came. In the village below, mothers told their children to place small bowls of milk by the door, so that the gods, if they returned, would find something pure to remember them by. Hapu, the farmer, whose fields had turned to dust, did so every evening. Each dawn he found the milk untouched, yet cooler than before, as if someone invisible had leaned near. The Nile was shrinking, but its presence still lingered, like the scent of rain in the land that no longer knew the word for water.
That night, the temple dreamed again. Every priest, every novice, even the old woman who swept the steps, fell into the same deep sleep. One that was not born from weariness, but from calling. Tuan found himself once more standing in the endless desert. The air was still, so still that his heartbeat became the only sound. The horizon glowed faintly, not with sun or moon, but with something gentler, the dim silver of memory. Before him, the boat of mist returned, silent as breath. It glided across the sand with neither shadow nor sound. And upon it sat the three gods, Isis, Osiris, and Hapi, exactly as before, yet somehow changed. Their forms were transparent, like water seen through glass, and their eyes no longer searched the distance. They were looking at him. Tuan fell to his knees. He wanted to speak, but no words came. The silence was vast, compassionate, and absolute. Then Isis raised her hand, not commanding, but tender. Between her fingers shimmered a single drop of water, suspended in the air. It caught the faint light and glowed like a small moon. She let it fall. The drop did not vanish. It struck the sand, and where it landed, a tiny pool formed, no larger than a footprint, but so clear it reflected the entire sky. Osiris leaned forward, his voice no longer sound, but a thought that filled the air. Water remembers gratitude, not need. His eyes shone with quiet sorrow, and the pool rippled. Hapi extended his hand above the pool. Let silence flow first, and the river will follow. The boat began to drift backward, its form dissolving like morning dew. The pool remained. Tuan looked down and saw his own reflection, but behind it he saw countless faces, farmers, mothers, children, all the living and the dead of Egypt, their eyes open beneath the surface. They were not weeping, they were listening. When he reached to touch the water, it moved toward him, climbing his fingers like a pulse returning home. The dream began to fade. The gods became light, and the desert turned to rain. Tuan awoke with a start. The temple was dark except for the flicker of one lamp. Outside he heard it, faint but real, a sound he had thought lost forever. Drip, then another. Drip. The sound of water returning. He rushed into the courtyard. From the sky tiny drops fell, each one vanishing as it touched the stone, leaving darker spots in the dust. The priests began to emerge one by one, standing in awe beneath the first rain they had seen in many years. Nebet stepped forward, her wrinkled hands open to the heavens. "They have not left us," she whispered. "They were only waiting."
The rain grew stronger, washing over the statues, filling the empty bowls at the altars, tracing bright veins across the courtyard stones. It was not a flood, not yet, but it was a beginning. Tuan raised his face, tears mixing with the rain. "Thank you," he murmured. And though the night was filled with nothing but the sound of falling water, it seemed that the gods, at last, were listening.
The sands around Memphis had been restless that summer. The wind, dry as bone, swept across the ruins and revealed what centuries had tried to hide. A group of workers, digging for stone near the old necropolis, struck something hollow beneath their feet. When they cleared the dust away, they uncovered a staircase descending into darkness. It was perfectly cut, each step smooth, cold, untouched by time. The foreman called for torches. Their flames trembled, unwilling to enter. From below came no sound, not even the usual breath of the earth. It was as though the pit itself was holding its breath. An old man who had lived by the ruins his entire life approached. His back was bent like the dunes, his eyes cloudy but sharp. "Do not go down," he warned. "There is a room beneath Memphis where even echoes are afraid." The younger men laughed. "You mean the Chamber of Echoes?" one said. The old man nodded. "It was built when gods still walked among us. The priests called it the Heart of Water. They said its walls could sing when the Nile still remembered its song. But curiosity, like time, does not listen. So they descended, one by one, the torches painting orange tremors on the stone. The staircase curved, winding into the earth like a serpent's spine. The deeper they went, the colder the air became, damp, metallic, heavy. Then they saw it. The chamber opened wide, carved from a single block of black basalt. Its ceiling arched like the inside of a rib cage. In its center stood a basin the size of a chariot, and from the walls protruded massive copper tubes, green with age. One of the men struck the basin with his torch handle. The sound that answered was not an echo, but a pulse, deep, resonant, as if the chamber itself had a heartbeat. The torches flickered. The air vibrated. "It's alive," someone whispered. But the sound faded almost instantly, swallowed by the weight of silence. The old man at the entrance closed his eyes. "You have woken what cannot wake," he murmured. He turned to leave, but the foreman called after him, half in jest. "Old man, what happens when the chamber sleeps again?" The elder paused at the threshold, his voice almost lost in the dark. "Those who entered when it was silent," he said, "never returned." The men laughed again, though softer this time. They explored further, touching the copper pipes, tracing the carvings of lotus and eyes that ran along the walls. Each line glimmered faintly, as if polished by breath long gone. Near the back of the chamber, one worker found a narrow slit in the stone. He pressed his ear against it. Nothing. Then a drop of water fell. Just one.
The sound was impossibly loud in the vast silence. He stepped back. The torches flickered again, their flames pulling toward the slit like they were breathing. "It's hollow behind," he whispered. The foreman knelt and struck the wall with his hammer. The chamber answered, not with echo, but with a low, living hum. The ground trembled, dust fell from the ceiling like pale rain. Then, silence. The kind that feels like listening to a god decide. The men stared at one another. "Let's leave," someone said. But none moved. There was a kind of awe in their stillness, the awe of hearing something ancient remember how to breathe.
That night, Memphis did not sleep. The wind had died, and even the desert insects seemed to hold their breath. In the chamber below, the air thickened, not with sound, but with anticipation. The workers had left, locking the entrance behind them, yet no one truly believed it was over. For hours, the ground beneath the ruins trembled with something too slow to be an earthquake. It was as if the earth was remembering a rhythm it had long forgotten. Near midnight, the old man returned. He carried only a single torch and a clay jar filled with Nile water, the last offering he had made before the river began to die. "If the gods breathe again," he whispered to the wind, "let them remember mercy." He descended the stone steps alone. The air grew heavier with every step. When he reached the bottom, he stopped. The chamber was not as it had been. The copper pipes gleamed faintly, though no light touched them. The basin in the center trembled, as though something beneath the stone was trying to rise. The old man set his torch beside it and poured the water into the basin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a sound, not loud, not sharp, but vast. It began deep within the walls, a vibration that spread through the floor and climbed the air like a heartbeat remembering itself. The copper tubes began to hum. Their tones were not music, not even notes. They were voices, distant and harmonic, blending into a single pulse. The old man fell to his knees. He had heard stories from his grandfather that the Chamber of Echoes once spoke when the Nile flowed strong, that the sound was the voice of creation, the sound the gods made when shaping the world. But he had never believed it until now. The hum grew deeper. The torch flickered, casting red veins of light across the black stone. The basin rippled, though no wind blew. From the copper tubes came whispers, fragments of something half human, half divine. 1,000 tones resonated, vibrating the air like invisible strings. And in that sound, one could almost hear words, or what came before words. Water remembers. The old man clasped his hands together, tears on his face. "You are awake," he said. "Then forgive us for our silence." The sound swelled, filling the chamber, shaking dust from the ceiling. The torchlight elongated, twisting as if the air itself was bending. And then, As suddenly as it had begun, the vibration stopped. The silence that followed was not absence. It was full, alive, like the pause between two heartbeats. The old man held still, listening. Somewhere deep behind the stone, he heard the slow trickle of water. A single drop fell into the basin. Another followed. Soon, the rhythm of falling drops became steady, soft, patient, eternal. The chamber had remembered how to breathe. Upstairs, the night wind returned to Memphis. The workers sleeping near the ruins stirred, hearing something faint, a hum beneath the earth, too low for ears, but enough to tremble the bones. One of them awoke, heart racing. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. His companion shook his head in the dark. "It's nothing," he muttered. But the hum continued, soft, like a lullaby buried in stone.
At dawn, the workers returned to the site. The wind had shifted, gentler now, carrying the scent of copper and wet stone. Birds circled above Memphis, silent, as though they too were listening. When the men reached the entrance to the stairway, they found the lock broken. The sand around it was damp. They called for the old man, but no one answered. Carefully, they descended. The torches hissed as their flames met the cool air below. The deeper they went, the stranger it felt, as though the air itself was pulsing, faintly, like a heartbeat under the stone. "It's warmer," one whispered. Another shook his head. "No, it's breathing." When they reached the chamber, they stopped. The basin that had been dry for centuries was now full. The water inside was still, too still, like glass. But beneath that surface, light moved, soft, golden, slow, as though the liquid itself was alive. The copper tubes glowed faintly, whispering a hum so low it could only be felt, not heard. "The old man," someone called, voice trembling. "Where is he?" They looked around. His torch lay beside the basin, burnt out. His clay jar, empty, floated at the edge. But there was no sign of him. Then, a sound. A single drop of water fell from the ceiling into the basin. The ripples spread outward, touching the copper edges. The hum deepened, and for an instant the entire chamber seemed to inhale. The torches flickered violently. The men stumbled back, shielding their eyes. And then, quiet. The kind of quiet that fills not the ears, but the bones. One of the younger workers leaned closer, unable to resist. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It's like it's sleeping." He touched the water. It was warm. And then, something shifted beneath it. The reflection on the surface blurred, replaced by another. A face. Not the old man's. Something vast, serene, with eyes that seemed older than the world. Its lips did not move, but every man heard the same whisper inside his mind. Those who entered when it was silent
are never gone. They froze. The hum began again, steady, slow, the rhythm of a slumbering heart. One by one, they dropped their torches and fled, running up the spiral stair until the wind met them once more. When they emerged into daylight, the sun had risen high. The ruins were bright, yet the air still trembled with a faint, unseen vibration, a reminder that the heart below was still beating. Days passed. The authorities came, sealing the entrance, marking it with warnings. But at night, those who lived near the necropolis swore they could hear it, the deep, patient sound of something vast beneath the ground, breathing in time with the river. And some nights, when the moon was full, the Nile near Memphis rippled without wind, carrying a low hum across the water, the echo of a forgotten machine, still singing softly to the gods who had never left.
Night in the palace of Sobek-Neferu was never truly silent. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, carrying the faint rustle of linen curtains, the whisper of servants walking barefoot across polished stone, the slow, rhythmic sigh of the Nile beyond the terrace. But that night, something changed. The air grew heavy, the torches burned low, and even the lotus incense seemed to forget its fragrance. The queen sat alone beneath a canopy of gold-threaded silk. Moonlight slipped through the thin curtains, scattering across the floor like falling dust. Her crown lay beside her, abandoned, for the weight of it had begun to feel like draught. She leaned over the writing table, tracing the curve of her name carved into a roll of limestone. Sobek-Neferu, daughter of the crocodile god. Her lineage was tied to the river, her very title bound to water. And yet, for 7 months, the Nile had refused to rise. Crops wilted, prayers echoed unanswered. Each morning she ordered offerings cast into the current, honey, barley, perfumed oils. But the river remained still, its surface flat as metal. "Perhaps the gods are tired of us," she whispered. Her attendant, a young priestess of Isis, lowered her eyes. "Perhaps they wait for us to remember my queen." Sobek-Neferu smiled faintly. "And what is it we have forgotten?" The girl hesitated. "The rhythm, Majesty, the sacred rhythm that keeps the river awake." The queen said nothing more. That night she retired early, but sleep came slowly. The wind outside had died, and the silence pressed like stone. When she finally drifted into dreams, she found herself standing on a vast plain of sand. The sky was the color of faded parchment. Before her, a river stretched, but it was shrinking, curling inward like a dying serpent. Its scales of water peeled away, revealing black earth beneath. The air smelled of copper and sorrow. A voice rose from nowhere and everywhere at once, the soft, timeless tone of Isis. "The river sleeps when hearts forget the sacred rhythm." Sobek-Neferu fell to her knees. "Then teach me again," she cried. "Tell me how to wake it." But the goddess did not answer.
Instead, the river before her turned to glass, and beneath it she saw reflections of countless faces, farmers, priests, children, staring up in silence. Their lips moved, but no sound came. The queen reached out, her fingers touching the surface. It was warm, like breath. Then the glass shattered into light. She gasped and woke. The moon had shifted. Wind moved through the curtains, stirring the lamps. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but recognition. She rose, still trembling, and called for her scribe. "Bring me a tablet of stone," she ordered. "Tonight the goddess has spoken." The scribe hesitated. "What shall I record, my queen?" She gazed toward the window, where the moonlight lay across the terrace like a silver road. "Her warning and her mercy," Sobek-Neferu said softly.
By morning, the palace had become a temple of whispers. Scribes moved silently through the corridors, carrying tablets and chisels. The priests of Heliopolis were summoned, their robes still damp from the morning rites. None dared speak aloud, for it was said that the queen had seen the goddess in her sleep, and that to interrupt her words was to silence the divine. Sobek-Neferu sat upon her throne, not in regality, but in stillness. Before her lay a single slab of red granite, freshly polished, gleaming like captured dawn. She placed her hand upon it. "This stone will remember," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but beneath it lay something trembling, not fear, but awe. The chief scribe knelt, stylus in hand. "Your Majesty," he said, "how shall it begin?" The queen closed her eyes. "With the hunger of men," she murmured, "and the silence of the gods." And so the chisels struck. Each word fell like a prayer. The hall filled with the sound of stone remembering language, deep, rhythmic, like the beating of the Nile's lost heart. She dictated slowly, her eyes half closed, as though still within the dream. "In the days when the river refused to rise, I saw the face of Isis in the mirror of the desert, and she spoke to me. The river sleeps when hearts forget the sacred rhythm. Awake, O people, not with fear, but with gratitude." The priests bowed as the words took form, their shadows trembling in the torchlight. "Do you believe it will bring the floods back?" asked the high priest quietly. Sobek-Neferu smiled faintly. "It is not the water that must return, it is the rhythm." She rose from her throne and approached the granite stele. With her own hands she poured libations of honey and milk upon its base. The liquid slid slowly down the stone, tracing the carved letters like veins of light. "For 7 years," she whispered, "my people have waited. Let these words become our offering." Outside, the sky darkened, though the sun still hung high. The wind from the west carried a low, distant hum, not thunder, but something older,
a resonance that seemed to answer her voice. The priests looked up, startled. "The chamber of echoes," one breathed. "It sings again." The queen turned her gaze toward the direction of Memphis, far beyond the palace walls. For a moment, her eyes shone as if seeing through time itself. Then the gods have heard. They remember the voice of water. That night, the stelae stood alone in the courtyard, bathed in moonlight. The inscriptions gleamed, alive with shadow. Servants said they heard faint music, not from instruments, but from the stone itself, as if the granite was breathing, repeating her words in silence. And when dawn came, a thin mist crept over the Nile, the first in years. The water did not rise yet, but it shivered, like something stirring from a long sleep.
That night, when the palace had gone quiet and the torches had burned to pale embers, Sobekneferu walked alone toward the river. No guards followed, no servants dared speak. The moon hung low and red, like a wounded eye gazing down at the earth. Each step she took echoed softly on the sandstone path, and the air smelled faintly of lotus and dust. She carried nothing but a small lamp and the memory of the goddess's voice. The Nile stretched before her, vast, still, silvered under the fading light. She stood at its edge, where the water kissed the worn stones, and whispered, "I have carved your words into stone, O Isis, but the river still sleeps. What more do you ask of me?" Her voice drifted over the water, unanswered. For a long time, there was nothing, only the faint hum of the wind across the reeds. Then, very softly, she heard it, a single drop falling, then another. The sound was so delicate, she thought it might be her imagination, but the ripples spread, circles upon circles, expanding, glimmering in the moonlight like breath returning to lungs. She knelt by the edge, her reflection trembling in the water. "Is this your mercy?" she asked. A whisper, softer than air, answered from nowhere, or perhaps from within her own heart. "The river no longer needs your offerings, my daughter, only your remembrance." Her eyes filled with tears. "Then let me remember," she breathed. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain, faint but real. In the distance, thunder rolled over the desert like a drum awakening the earth. She bowed her head. "Osiris, Isis, Hapi, if this is the rhythm, let me be its keeper." She dipped her fingers into the river. The water was cold and moving, not fast, not yet, but alive. She laughed softly, the sound breaking like dawn over the silence. Behind her, the palace lamps flickered as if stirred by unseen breath. The priests later said that the queen stayed there until sunrise, watching the slow pulse of the water return. By morning, the mist thickened, veiling her form from view.
When her attendants found her, she was sitting still, eyes open, smiling faintly, as though she were listening to something far away. Some claimed she had joined the gods that night, carried upon the silver current she loved. Others said she merely fell asleep beside the Nile, at peace, her heartbeat joining the rhythm of the waters she had revived. And when the floods came weeks later, the priests declared it a miracle. The people knelt by the riverbanks, calling her the queen who spoke to the sleeping river. The granite stele still stands today on the island of Sahel, its inscriptions faint but enduring.
7 days had passed since the queen's dream became stone. The steel gleamed under the morning sun, its carved words whispering to every breeze that crossed the river. Yet the Nile remained still, quiet as breath held too long. The people of Thebes and Memphis began to gather along its banks, their faces drawn, their feet cracked from the dust of waiting. They did not curse the gods anymore. Something softer had replaced despair, a kind of listening. They believed the river would hear them if they remembered how to speak its language. Priests in white linen stood along the terraces, burning frankincense that curled into silver threads across the sky. "We shall sing," said the eldest among them, "not to command the water, but to remind it we still remember." From the crowd came an old farmer, his hands calloused, his eyes rimmed with salt and sun. He placed his jar of grain at the river's edge. "For my wife," he said quietly, "and for the children she will never see grown." A hush followed his words. Then another farmer stepped forward, and another. Soon hundreds of offerings lined the shore. Not gold, not treasure, but bread, milk, and tears. The priests raised their hands. "Begin the hymn to Hapi," the high priest declared. The drums began first, slow, deep, like footsteps descending into the earth. The sound carried far, echoing against the cliffs of the west bank. Then came the voices, soft at first, trembling with both fear and faith. "Hail to you, Hapi, who comes forth from the earth, who nourishes the fields, who fills the hearts of men with joy." The melody rose like dawn breaking through smoke. Children clapped in rhythm. Women hummed the refrains once taught by their grandmothers. It was said that every grain of sand along the shore began to tremble with the memory of rain. And somewhere in the crowd, unnoticed at first, stood a blind girl. Her name was Merit. She was no priestess, no noble's child, only a singer from the streets whose voice had once brought coins to her mother's bowl. Her sight
had left her long ago, but she said she could still see light through sound. When the drums grew louder, she lifted her head. "The river," she whispered. "It's listening." The priest beside her frowned. "Child, stay back. This is no place for—" But before he could finish, the wind changed. The air shimmered, and a warmth like breath touched Merritt's face. She opened her mouth, and what came forth was not merely song. It was something older, purer, as though the air itself remembered how to speak. The first note that left Merritt's lips trembled like a newborn flame. The crowd fell silent, as if time itself had stopped to listen. Her voice was thin at first, fragile, but it grew, not in volume, but in depth. Each word seemed to sink into the water, ripple through the air, and return changed, carrying echoes that did not belong to her. The priests froze. One whispered, "That is not her alone." Her melody wrapped itself around the old hymn, twining through the drum beats, weaving between the flutes. The song became something else, less of a performance, more of a prayer spoken by the earth itself. The blind girl's head tilted back, her eyes unseeing yet filled with light. She sang of the river's birth, of the first rains that fell before men had names. She sang of Osiris and Isis embracing above the floods, of the day Hapi's laughter filled the world. Her tone deepened until even the reeds began to hum. A shepherd on the far bank dropped to his knees. A woman clasped her child and wept. It was said that at that moment, the ibis birds circling above Karnak changed their flight, forming a spiral like an open eye. The high priest pressed his palms together, trembling. "Isis speaks," he murmured. "Through her, she sings." But Merritt could not hear them. She was somewhere beyond the sound, her body still, her breath steady as the current that had not yet moved. Around her, the chorus continued, each voice finding courage within hers. The music rose, a tapestry of devotion, until it reached the edge of something invisible, ancient, waiting. And then, from beneath the surface of the river, came a sound no one had heard in years, the low, resonant murmur of water shifting against stone. The people gasped. The drums stopped. Merritt's final note lingered in the air, shimmering like light on metal. Then she fell silent, her lips parted, as if listening to something within the depths. The ground trembled softly. Somewhere upriver, a heron took flight, then another, and then a single wave broke upon the shore, touching her feet. The water was cool, alive. She smiled faintly, tears tracing down her cheeks. He remembers. The river remembers. For a long moment, the people could not move.
The wave that touched Marette's feet had left a mark, not of wetness, but of warmth. Then, slowly, a sound rose from the heart of the Nile. It was not the rush of flood or the roar of storm, but something quieter, deeper, the sound of water remembering itself. It began as a hum beneath the earth, spreading like a pulse through stone and root. The river breathed. The mist along the banks began to glow faintly, as if moonlight were being born again inside it. Children pointed, elders wept. The priests knelt in unison, pressing their foreheads to the ground. And Marette stood still, her white dress fluttering gently around her ankles, her blind eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of the awakening current. A golden heron descended and perched upon a reed beside her. It was said that this was the sign of Isis herself, watching, listening, singing through the air. The crowd began to hum again, softly this time, afraid to break the spell. Their voices trembled like strings in the wind. The high priest whispered, "Hapi returns." And as if the very words carried weight, the river responded. Ripples multiplied. The dark surface stirred, rolling over itself, folding into waves. The water crept higher, licking the stones that had not known touch in years. The scent of wet earth filled the air, rich and heavy, the perfume of rebirth. The drums resumed, but now they sounded different, as though the rhythm came from beneath their hands rather than within them. Even the sky changed, clouds forming where none had been. Thunder murmured, not with anger, but with relief. And then it happened. A voice, low and distant, rose from the current, a vibration that was both word and song. You remembered. The sound was in every chest, every tear, every heartbeat. The Nile had spoken. The people fell to their knees. They did not shout or cheer. They only bowed their heads, hands to hearts, and wept, not from sorrow, but from awe. The river's surface shimmered as if smiling, and the sun, hidden for days, broke through the clouds. Light spilled across the water like molten gold. The blind girl turned her face toward it, and for the first time in her life, she saw brightness, not with her eyes, but within her soul. And when her song ended, it was said the river kept singing. Even now, in the hush of night, when the desert wind is soft, travelers along the Nile claim they can still hear that hymn, not from temples or priests, but from the river itself. It hums to the rhythm of gratitude, the same words that began it all. Hail to you, Hapi, who brings life from silence.
When the sun returned, it did not burn, it blessed. Its light fell softly over the Nile, no longer a river of silence, but one of reflection. The water glimmered with gold and blue, as if the sky had dissolved into its current. Along its banks, the people of Egypt moved quietly, their voices low, their eyes calm. There were no celebrations, no cries of triumph, only gratitude, deep and wordless. The floods had come, yet it was not the water they worshipped now. It was what the water had taught them. "No river lives forever," said an old priest, kneeling beside the flow. "Only gratitude keeps it alive in us." His hands cupped the current, letting it slip between his fingers like time. Behind him, children played in the mud, their laughter rising like birds. The Queen's steel still stood upon Sihel Island, and though seasons had washed its surface, her words remained. The river sleeps when hearts forget the sacred rhythm. The people now understood. It was not a curse, but a lesson, that all things sacred require remembering. The same is true of love, of kindness, of peace. Even gods sleep, but the world must keep dreaming. Night fell slowly, and with it came a breeze that carried the scent of wet papyrus and oil lamps. Fishermen lit their torches upon the boats, their flames dancing over the surface like stars adrift. The Nile reflected everything, heaven and earth, man and God, silence and song. In that mirrored stillness, one could almost hear the breath of the divine, a gentle hum that said, "Every silence hides a lesson. Every river remembers." That night, the wind carried no sound of worship, no chant, no prayer, only the quiet breathing of the world. The Nile flowed again, slow and deliberate, its surface mirroring 1,000 scattered stars. The people had returned to their homes, yet their hearts remained by the river. It was said that when the gods finally sleep, the sky listens. The priests of Heliopolis gathered upon the roof of their temple, watching the constellation of Isis rise in the east. The eldest among them spoke softly. "The river has awakened, but not to our voices. It stirred because we learned to be silent." The younger ones looked puzzled. "To be silent?" one asked. "Is that prayer?" The elder smiled faintly. "When the heart listens more than it asks, yes." Beneath them, the torches of the fishermen dotted the river like floating stars. The reflection of heaven swayed upon the ripples, each wave carrying light, as if the universe had learned to breathe with the water. In the distance, a flute played, not from temple or court, but from some lone traveler by the shore. Its notes drifted over the current, thin and wistful, weaving through the mist. The melody carried the old refrain. "Even gods sleep, but the world must keep dreaming." It was a song older than empire, sung before pyramids rose from sand.
a song that spoke not of power, but of endurance, the kind of faith that survives silence. An old woman, sitting by her hut, whispered along with it, her wrinkled hands tracing invisible lines in the air. "Yes," she murmured, "keep dreaming." And somewhere high above, the constellations seemed to pulse as though answering her. For a heartbeat, the universe felt intimate, infinite, yet close enough to touch. The Nile moved gently, unhurried, as if savoring every reflection upon its skin. In that stillness, time itself loosened its grip. The past no longer felt ancient, nor the present fleeting. All things simply were. The sky listened, the river remembered, and the earth, for the first time in centuries, rested.
The night deepened, and the world exhaled. The Nile lay beneath the sky like a silver ribbon, uncoiling through darkness and time. The stars leaned closer, mirrored perfectly upon the water, so that no one could tell where heaven ended and the river began. Somewhere, a single torch flickered on a fisherman's boat, its flames swaying to the rhythm of unseen waves. From far above, the wind whispered softly through the reeds, carrying the scent of silt, myrrh, and ancient prayers. It was the scent of memory, of something that had once been lost and now remembered. The voice of the narrator softened, blending with the hush of the current. Every silence hides a lesson. Every river remembers. These were not words carved in stone, but truths carried in breath, in the pulse of water, the heartbeat of the earth. The Nile had taught humanity its oldest wisdom, that nothing endures without gratitude, that stillness itself is a form of grace. The philosophers of Memphis later wrote, "When man learns to thank before asking, he lives in the rhythm of gods." And in that moment, Egypt understood. Civilization is not measured in monuments, but in how gently we hold what gives us life. The camera drifts above the river, past fields reborn, villages resting, temples half buried in moonlight. The melody fades into a low hum, like the echo of creation itself. The stars shimmer brighter, their reflections forming 1,000 silver eyes watching the current flow. The narration continues, almost as a whisper. Even gods sleep, but the world must keep dreaming. The scene widens, the Nile winding endlessly through the desert, glowing faintly like the vein of a sleeping giant. The sound of the river merges with a heartbeat, slow and steady, fading into the rhythm of sleep. And as the final words fall, they are not spoken, but felt. Gratitude is the current that never dies.